two, one, two.
On his last album of the 20th century, Warren Zevon sang "Life Will Kill Ya," and he sure wasn't kidding. And although he would die only 3 years later, what a life it was. Zevon was born in Chicago on January 24th, 1947. The son of an immigrant doctor and a Salt Lake City Mormon, Zevon and his family moved to Fresno, California at the age of 13. Once in Fresno, Zevon began taking piano lessons, influenced by visits to Igor Stravinsky and Robert Kraft. At age 16, Zevon's parents divorced, which inspired Zevon to drop out of high school and move to New York City on his own. Whilst in New York, Zevon and then-girlfriend Violet Santangelo started a pop duo called Lime and Sybil. When that didn't work out, Zevon became a session musician, composing and sometimes performing with the rock group The Turtles. Zevon also wrote and composed a song for Midnight Cowboy at this time, entitled "He Quit Me," and sung by Leslie Miller. It was later in 1969 that Zevon caught the attention of Kim Fowley, manager of the Runaways, and recorded his debut record entitled "Wanted Dead or Alive." Unfortunately, Wanted didn't sell well, causing Zevon to drop from the limelight and become the musical coordinator for the Everly Brothers. Shortly after the Everly Brothers disbanded in 1973, Zevon left the U.S. and traveled to Sitges, Spain, where he stayed for 2 years. While in Sitges, Zevon met David Lindell, a former mercenary, who collaborated with him on "Rollin' the Headless Thompson Gunner," one of his most popular songs, which would end up being the last one he would perform publicly. Zevon's time in Spain inspired him to write and compose virtually non-stop, and in 1975, Zevon moved back to LA, where he met Stevie Nicks and Jackson Browne. It was Zevon's notorious friendship with Browne that led to the recording of his second self-titled album. Seemingly out of nowhere, Zevon had become infused with the 1970s LA singer-songwriter movement. Although only a modest success, Zevon's self-titled album was recognized by the Rolling Stone Record Guide as his masterpiece. In 1978, Zevon released his third album, Excitable Boy, which became a smash hit with heavy radio play. The album played host to many of Zevon's most recognizable tunes, such as Werewolves of London and Lawyers, Guns and Money. Rolling Stone even cited Zevon as one of the 4 best new artists of the 70s, alongside Bruce Springsteen, Jackson Browne, and Neil Young. However, with the fame came the infamy, as Zevon's hard-partying ways and rampant alcoholism had him dubbed F. Scott Fitzzevon by his friends, who were convinced he would die like the famous author due to his lifestyle. However, following his next album, Bad Luck Streak and Dancing School, Zevon's critical and commercial worth began to decline. Following a brief stint of sobriety, Zevon relapsed. Upon the divorce from his wife, Crystal, and the loss of his recording contract, of which he learned from by reading the gossip column of Rolling Stone, Zevon retreated from the music scene for 5 years, entering rehab to overcome his severe addiction issues. During this time, Zevon was able to bond with his son Jordan, whom he fathered out of wedlock, and meet new influences, including a close friendship with writer Hunter S. Thompson and comedian David Letterman. Zevon returned to music stone sober with Sentimental Hygiene, which contained a more rock-oriented sound and featured contributions from such varied artists as Bob Dylan, Flea, and George Clinton. Zevon also began his friendship with Jorge Calderon during this time, who would become Zevon's right-hand man and collaborator up until his death. Zevon was once again let out of his recording contract following the failure of his concept album, Transverse City. However, Zevon re-signed with Giant Records, where he released a new album under the moniker Hindu Love Gods, a band which he formed with the Michael Stipe-less REM. It was with this band that Zevon scored his next big hit, a rock and roll cover of Prince's Raspberry Beret. In 1991, Zevon returned to his pop roots with Mr. Bad Example. The album was given much exposure following the use of one of his song titles, Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead, for a title of a crime film starring Andy Garcia. As the use of the title was unauthorized, the filmmakers later sought permission and even included the song in their end credits. Zevon returned to solo touring during the 1990s, using his fame in Europe and Australia to help support himself, as he had no money to support tours with a full band. Zevon recorded many of these sessions and eventually released them as his unplugged album, Learning to Flinch. By 1995, Zevon also had many small side projects, including composing music for television, including the shows Action and Route 66, and occasionally filling in as the band leader for Late Night with David Letterman. Zevon took time off from the industry following an abysmal sale of his self-produced album Mutineer, despite critical acclaim and touring promotion from Bob Dylan. In 2000, Zevon signed with Artemis Records to release Life Will Kill Ya, a much more solemn and mature musical venture than his previous work. The album sold well, and Zevon experienced a second comeback. Zevon also ventured into acting, working on Dwight Yoakam's South of Heaven, West of Hell, where he befriended Billy Bob Thornton over their issues with obsessive-compulsive disorder. In 2002, upon recommendation from a dentist, Zevon's phobia of doctors caught up with him, and he was diagnosed with inoperable mesothelioma. Fearing that medical treatments may incapacitate him, Zevon went into the recording studio during his final months to record his last album. It was also during this time that Zevon broke his 17-year sobriety, relapsing back into alcoholism, yet not in the self-destructive context as his younger self. Production of his last album was heavily documented, with a documentary crew from VH1 chronicling Zevon's last months. The resulting film showed a hard-working man who retained his sense of humor, even in the face of death. On October 30th, 2002, Zevon was featured on The Late Show with David Letterman, as the only guest for the entire hour. Zevon performed several songs and spoke at length about his illness. When asked what lesson he has learned throughout his entire life, he said, "Enjoy every sandwich." Zevon lived to see the release of the album, The Wind. It was his highest-selling album since Excitable Boy, and won Zevon 2 posthumous Grammy Awards for Best Contemporary Folk Album and Best Rock Performance by a Duo or a Group. Less than 2 weeks after the album's release, Zevon died in his home in Los Angeles. Following his death, Zevon had 2 compilation albums released, as well as many unused takes and tracks released on digital re-releases of his albums. Furthermore, 2 tribute albums have been released featuring covers by friends Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, The Pixies, and The Wallflowers. In 2007, Zevon's ex-wife, Crystal, released a biography of Warren entitled I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, The Dirty Life and Times of Warren Zevon. Although being in the music business for 30-plus years, Zevon never became a household name. However, his music has had a strong cult following, and he is still widely considered to be one of the most consistent and uncompromising pop musicians to have ever lived.